The rain fell like judgment over Silverwood Cemetery. Not the gentle spring rain that nourishes, but the cold October kind that punishes, the kind that soaks through wool and leather and bone, reminding every living thing of its inevitable return to earth. Dominic Ravencroft stood at the edge of the open grave, watching them lower Marcus Silverpaw into the ground. 58 years old. Alpha of the Silverpaw Pack for 32 years. Dead from what the human death certificate called a stroke. But what every wolf in attendance knew was alpha decay. The slow, inexorable shutdown of an alpha's body when the bloodline runs dry. Around the grave stood 6 other alphas. Once there had been 12, then 10, then 8, now 7, and soon Dominic knew there would be 6. The mathematics of extinction were simple and brutal. Alpha. Meredith Frost stood opposite Dominic, her silver hair pulled back tight, her face carved from winter stone. 52 years old. No children, no heir. She met Dominic's eyes across the grave, and in that moment, they understood each other perfectly. They were the old guard, the last of a dying breed, and when they fell, there would be no one to carry the crown. The priest was human. He read from a book he didn't understand about a god who had long ago stopped listening to the prayers of wolves. The words washed over Dominic like the rain, meaningless sounds to fill the silence before the dirt. Dominic's beta, Sebastian Hale, stood 3 paces behind him. 55 years old, 27 years of service, the only man alive who had saved Dominic's life more times than Dominic could count. Sebastian's face showed nothing, but Dominic could smell the grief beneath the control. Could smell something else too, something bitter and sharp, resentment maybe, or vindication. They had argued about this, about coming to the funeral. Sebastian had said it was weakness to show the other packs how shaken they were. Dominic had said it was weakness to hide from truth. The truth was in the ground, 6 feet down and getting deeper. When the last prayer was spoken, when the first shovel of earth hit the coffin with its final condemning thud, the alphas began to disperse. No one lingered. No one wanted to think too hard about the hole in the earth that would eventually swallow them all. Dominic turned to leave and found Elder Cornelius blocking his path. 73 years old. Keeper of the ancient laws, the walking embodiment of everything their kind had been, and everything they were failing to remain. His eyes were the color of smoke, and they saw too much. "Walk with me, Dominic." It wasn't a request. They walked in silence through the cemetery, past graves of wolves who had died in their prime, in battle, with honor. Not like Marcus, not withering away while their own bodies betrayed them. 4 of the 7 are over 50 now, Cornelius said finally. His voice was dry leaves scraping stone. In 15 years, there has not been a single alpha born. Do you understand what that means? It means we're dying, Dominic said. No point in softening it. It means the bloodline is rejecting us. Cornelius stopped beside a grave marker from 1847. The name was worn away, but the symbol remained. A wolf's head crowned with thorns. Your family symbol. The Ravencroft line has ruled for 400 years, unbroken, until now. Dominic's jaw worked. He refused to give Cornelius the satisfaction of visible pain. I have an heir. You have a broken child. Cornelius didn't flinch from the truth. Asher hasn't spoken in 8 months. He shifts at random. 3 therapists have quit. 2 have been hospitalized. The council is losing patience, Dominic. The council can go to hell. The council is all that stands between order and chaos, between civilization and extinction. Cornelius turned to face him fully. In 60 days, we convene the Summit of 7. We will vote on the Consolidation Act. 7 packs will become 3. The weak will be absorbed by the strong. And Ravencroft, I'm afraid, is no longer strong. The words hit like silver bullets. Dominic felt them punch through his ribs, scatter his concentration. You're saying we'll be absorbed. I'm saying you have 60 days to prove that Asher can be an alpha. 60 days to show that the Ravencroft line has a future. Cornelius's ancient eyes held something that might have been pity. Or you can step aside with dignity. Let your pack merge with Frost or Ironwood. Let your people survive under a different name. That's not survival, that's surrender. Sometimes, Cornelius said quietly, they're the same thing. He walked away, leaving Dominic alone among the dead. The rain continued to fall. Dominic stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of the crown he wore. Not a physical thing, no gold or jewels, just the crushing pressure of 30 years of rule. 30 years of decisions that ended in graves like this. 30 years of sending young wolves to die protecting borders that didn't matter anymore. 30 years of watching his kind dwindle and fade while the human world pressed in from all sides. He thought of Isabel, his mate. Dead 3 years now. She had given him Asher at the cost of her own life. A high-risk pregnancy that every healer had warned against. But she had wanted to give him an heir, had wanted to secure the bloodline. And what had it bought them? A child too broken to speak, too traumatized to control his own skin, too damaged to ever wear the crown. Dominic had killed for lesser failures. He had certainly killed to enforce lesser laws. The thought of Sebastian's son rose unbidden. Ethan, 10 years old, shadow-touched and legally condemned. Dominic had given the order personally, had watched Sebastian carry the boy into the execution chamber, had smelled the father's anguish as he was forced to be the instrument of his own son's death. The law was the law. Shadow bloodlines could not be allowed to propagate. The risk was too great. The madness was too certain. And now Asher showed the same signs, the same dark shimmer in his eyes when he lost control, the same ability to slip between spaces, to vanish into corners where light couldn't reach. Dominic should have given the same order, should have been consistent, should have been fair, but he was a father before he was a king. And that, perhaps, was why the bloodline was dying. Because alphas were supposed to put the pack before everything, even their own children, especially their own children. He returned to Ravencroft Manor as the sun set. The estate sprawled across 200 acres of old-growth forest on the outskirts of Ironhaven. The main house was a fortress disguised as a home, stone and steel and bulletproof glass, 16 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a security system that could detect a sparrow's heartbeat at 300 yards. And in the center of all that protection, all that power, was one small boy who couldn't protect himself from his own mind. Dominic found Martha in the kitchen. She had been with the family for 40 years, had served Dominic's father before him. She was human, but she knew more about wolves than most pups did. More importantly, she knew when to speak, and when silence was the greater kindness. "How was the funeral?" she asked, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Wet. You're soaked through. I'll draw you a bath. Where's Asher?" Her knife paused. Just for a fraction of a second. Just long enough for Dominic to know. Containment room. He had another episode during lunch, shattered every window in the dining hall. Dominic's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Anyone hurt?" "Just property damage this time." "But Dominic..." She set down the knife and turned to face him. Her eyes were kind but firm, the eyes of a woman who had raised him and now watched him fail his own son. "You can't keep him locked in a basement. He's a child, not a prisoner. He's a danger. He's terrified." "Then maybe," Dominic said more harshly than he intended, "he's right to be." He descended the stairs to the basement before Martha could respond, before she could look at him with that combination of disappointment and pity that made him feel like a boy again, failing to live up to his father's legacy. The containment room was at the end of a long corridor. Reinforced steel door, keypad lock, small window of unbreakable glass. Through the window, Dominic could see his son. Asher sat in the center of the room, knees pulled to his chest, rocking slightly. 4 years old, small for his age, dark curls matted with sweat. His eyes were closed, but Dominic could see the rapid movement beneath the lids. Nightmares even when awake. The room was padded. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. No hard surfaces to break. No sharp edges to bleed on. A prison designed to look like safety. Dominic had toured facilities like this once. Human mental institutions where they kept the ones who couldn't integrate, the ones too broken to fix. He had pitied those patients. Now his son lived in the same kind of cage. He punched in the code and opened the door. Asher's eyes snapped open. They were the same storm gray as Dominic's own, but shot through with veins of darkness. Shadow blood rising to the surface. The Ravencroft curse made visible. The boy didn't speak. Hadn't spoken in 8 months. Not since the night he watched something kill his mother. Something he couldn't describe. Something that lived in the spaces between light and dark. Dominic knelt down, keeping his distance. His wolf instinct screamed to go to the child, to comfort, to protect. But approaching too fast would trigger a shift. Touching without warning would trigger an attack. He had learned these lessons through blood and broken furniture. "Hey, pup." His voice was soft, the voice he used only for Asher. Never for the pack, never for the council. Bad day? Asher's eyes tracked him, wary, feral. The eyes of something that had learned trust was a prelude to pain. The sight carved something out of Dominic's chest. "I was at a funeral today. Do you know what that is?" No response, but the boy was listening. The tilt of his head showed that much. "It's where we put people when they stop working, when they run out of time." Dominic sat down fully, crossing his legs, making himself smaller, less threatening, less alpha, and more father. The man who died was an alpha, like me. He was strong for a long time. Then he got tired, and his body stopped listening to him. Asher's breathing slowed slightly. The tension in his small shoulders eased a fraction. "Do you ever feel like that, pup? Like your body doesn't listen?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, barely visible, Asher nodded. It was the first communication in weeks. Something cracked behind Dominic's sternum, a fissure in the armor he'd worn for 30 years. "Yeah, me too. Sometimes I feel like I'm piloting a machine that wants to shut down. And I have to keep it running because people need me to. But it's tired. God, it's so tired." He didn't know why he was saying this. Didn't know why he was confessing weakness to his 4-year-old son. Maybe because Asher was the only one who couldn't judge him for it. Couldn't use it against him. Couldn't spread it through the pack like poison. Or maybe because he had no one else to tell. Asher uncurled slightly. His small hand reached out, not quite touching Dominic, but close, palm up, an offering of trust so fragile it could shatter with a wrong breath. Dominic reached out and placed his hand over Asher's. The boy's skin was fever hot. His pulse rabbited beneath the surface. But he didn't pull away, didn't retreat into shadows. They sat like that for a long time, father and son, alpha and heir. Two prisoners in different cages, reaching across the space between. Finally, Dominic spoke. "I'm going to find someone who can help you. Someone who understands what it's like to have your body betray you. Will you trust me?" Asher looked at him with those dark-veined eyes. And for just a moment, Dominic saw his son. Not a monster, not a liability, not the curse that would end 400 years of lineage. Just a scared little boy who wanted to be fixed. The boy squeezed his hand once. It would have to be enough. That night, Dominic sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and a file folder he didn't want to open. The folder had been delivered by Elder Cornelius 3 days ago. Before the funeral, before the ultimatum, before the 60-day clock started ticking like a bomb. It contained the name of a human woman who specialized in art restoration. Medieval tapestries, specifically. The very same tapestries that hung in Ravencroft Manor's East Wing, documenting 400 years of unbroken lineage. It was a cover story, of course. The council didn't care about tapestries. They cared about the woman's other qualifications. Nora Ashford, 38 years old, former military medic, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, specialized in trauma care. Honorable discharge after her younger brother was killed in a training accident. She had been his legal guardian. He had been severely autistic. She understood broken children. Her husband had died 6 years ago. The file said suicide, PTSD. But there were inconsistencies in the coroner's report that suggested something more complicated, something covered up. She had no family left, no close friends, no ties to keep her in her current life. She was perfect. Isolated, desperate enough to take an offer that seemed too good to be true. Dominic hated how calculated it was. How the council had clearly vetted her, chosen her, positioned her like a chess piece to solve their problem. But he was desperate enough not to care. He opened his laptop and composed an email. "Miss Ashford, I am writing on behalf of the Ravencroft estate. We have a collection of 16th century tapestries in need of professional restoration. Your credentials are impressive. Would you be available for a 6-month contract? Compensation and terms negotiable. Please respond at your earliest convenience." He signed it with his name, not his title, just Dominic Ravencroft. Then he hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came 3 hours later. Fast enough to suggest she'd been waiting for something. Anything. A reason to leave whatever life she'd been barely surviving. "Mr. Ravencroft, I appreciate the offer. However, I'm currently committed to several other projects. Unless the compensation is truly exceptional, I'm afraid I'll have to decline. Best regards, Nora Ashford." Dominic's mouth quirked despite everything. She was testing him, seeing if he was serious, seeing what he was willing to pay. Good. He respected people who knew their worth. He typed back, $500,000, half up front, room and board provided, medical insurance, full benefits. All I ask is 6 months of your time and your discretion. He hit send. The reply came faster this time. That's not compensation for art restoration. What are you really asking for? Dominic stared at the screen, at the blinking cursor, at the question that demanded honesty he wasn't sure he could afford to give. Finally, he typed, I'm asking you to save my son. The cursor blinked, once, twice, 20 times. Then finally, I'll arrive Tuesday. Nora Ashford arrived on a gray Tuesday morning that matched the color of her eyes. She drove a 15-year-old Honda that had seen better decades. She wore jeans, a canvas jacket, and boots that had walked through worse places than Ravencroft Manor. Dominic watched from the upstairs window as she climbed out of her car. She was tall, lean in the way of people who forgot to eat when stress took over. Her hair was dark with threads of gray she didn't bother to hide. She moved like someone who had trained her body to be a weapon, and then retired that weapon to gentler uses, but never forgot how to deploy it. She looked up at the manor, and even from this distance, Dominic could see the assessment in her eyes, the tactical mind cataloging exits, evaluating defensible positions, mapping escape routes, old habits from a life spent in war zones. She would need those instincts here. Martha met her at the door. Dominic heard the murmur of voices, the offer of coffee, the polite deflection. Then footsteps on the stairs, measured, controlled. The gait of someone who never walked into a room without knowing all the ways out. Martha knocked once and opened the door. Miss Ashford to see you, sir. Nora walked in without hesitation, without deference, without the careful submission most humans showed around wolves, even when they didn't know what they were sensing. She looked around the study, taking in the leather furniture, the mahogany shelves, the subtle displays of wealth and power that spoke of old money and older violence. Her expression didn't change. She turned to Dominic and extended her hand. Mr. Ravencroft? Her grip was firm, calloused. She didn't try to compete with his strength, but she didn't yield either. And her scent hit him like a physical thing. Not perfume, not artificial, just clean skin and something underneath. Something that made his wolf sit up and take notice. Mate! The word rose unbidden from the most primitive part of his brain. The part that still thought in territory and dominance and the perpetuation of bloodlines. He crushed the thought, shoved it down. He didn't have time for instinct, didn't have time for the mate bond that happened to maybe 1 in 1,000 wolves, and certainly didn't have time to process what it meant that his wolf had just recognized a human as its other half. Thank you for coming, Dominic said, releasing her hand before the contact could betray him. Thank you for being direct in your email. She gestured to the chair across from his desk. May I? Please. She sat, crossed one leg over the other, waited with the patience of someone who had outlasted enemy combatants and military bureaucracy. Dominic studied her. Up close, he could see the scars. A thin line across her left eyebrow, another at her hairline. Shrapnel, probably. The shadows under her eyes spoke of sleep that didn't come easily. And there, on her wrist, barely visible beneath her sleeve, a scar that ran vertical, self-inflicted. A moment of desperation survived. She caught him looking and met his gaze without flinching. The file mentioned you have experience with autism, Dominic said. My brother Daniel. He was nonverbal from age 3, prone to violent meltdowns when overstimulated. I was his legal guardian from the time I was 22 until he died at 19. I'm sorry. Don't be. He taught me more about courage than the army ever did. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Ravencroft, I'm not here for the tapestries. I looked up your family, old money, old power. The kind of family that doesn't advertise. So let's skip the pretense. You have a child with special needs. You think I can help. Tell me what I'm actually walking into. Dominic appreciated the directness. He was so tired of dancing around truth. Tired of the political games that required 50 words when 5 would do. My son is 4 years old. He witnessed his mother's death. Since then, he hasn't spoken. He has episodes of extreme aggression. He destroys property. He sent 3 therapists to the hospital. He's currently living in a containment room in my basement because it's the only place he can't hurt himself or others. Nora's expression didn't change. She just listened with the focus of someone trained to triage in chaos. I'm told you understand PTSD, Dominic continued. You understand trauma. You understand what it's like when the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. I do. Can you help him? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, what happened to his mother? Dominic's chest constricted. He forced air through the tightness. She was killed. In this house. Asher was in the room. By whom? We don't know. He can't tell us. Nora nodded slowly. Has he been evaluated by a psychiatrist? 7 of them. Medications? He's 4 years old. I'm not drugging my child into compliance. Good. She uncrossed her legs and leaned back. Mr. Ravencroft, I can't promise I'll fix him. Trauma doesn't fix. It integrates. It becomes part of the architecture. The best you can hope for is that he learns to live with it, to function despite it. That's all I'm asking. And if I fail? If in 6 months he's no better? Dominic's breath caught in his lungs. He thought of Cornelius, the ultimatum, the 60 days that had now become 57, the Consolidation Act, the mercy facilities where they sent the ones who couldn't be saved. Then I'll have to make a very hard decision. Nora held his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw that she understood exactly what kind of decision he meant. She had probably made similar ones, in field hospitals, in triage tents, deciding who got to live when there weren't enough resources for everyone. I want to meet him first, she said, before I agree to anything. Of course. He led her down to the basement, down the long corridor with its 2 bright lights and 2 clean walls, to the steel door with its small window, to the cage where he kept his son for everyone's safety. He's been alone for 4 hours, Dominic said quietly. Usually that's enough time for him to calm down after an episode. Usually? Sometimes it takes days. He unlocked the door and opened it. Asher was curled at the corner, the same position, the same defensive ball of trembling limbs, but his eyes were open. And they tracked Nora the instant she entered. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't show fear or uncertainty. She walked into the room and sat down on the floor, a respectful distance from the boy. Not too close, not threatening, just present. Dominic started to follow, but she held up one hand. Stop. He froze in the doorway. Nora looked at Asher. The boy looked back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched. Dominic counted heartbeats. His own, elevated from her proximity, and what his wolf insisted she meant. The boy's rapid flutter. Nora's steady, controlled rhythm, the rhythm of someone who had learned to regulate their nervous system under fire. Then Nora did something unexpected. She rolled up her left sleeve, slowly, deliberately, revealing the vertical scar on her wrist, the evidence of her own breaking point, the proof that she understood what it meant when survival stopped feeling worth the effort. She held out her arm so Asher could see it. I hurt too, she said quietly. A long time ago. My body didn't listen to me anymore. My mind told me things that weren't true. And I did this because I wanted the noise to stop. Asher's eyes fixed on the scar. It didn't stop the noise, Nora continued. It just made different noise, worse noise, so I had to learn a different way, a harder way. I had to learn to live with the noise until it got quieter on its own. She lowered her arm but didn't cover the scar. You're hurting, aren't you? She said. And you can't tell anyone how. You can't make the words work. So your body tries to tell people the only way it knows how, by breaking things, by screaming without sound. Asher's breathing hitched. His small chest rose and fell faster. That's okay, Nora said. You don't have to use words with me. We can find other ways. Drawing, playing, building things, breaking things if we have to. Whatever helps the noise get quieter. She stayed sitting. Didn't reach for him. Didn't make promises she couldn't keep. Didn't offer the false comfort of certainties no one could guarantee. I'm Nora, she said. I'm going to be around for a while. You don't have to like me. You don't have to trust me. You don't even have to look at me. But I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not afraid of you. Asher uncurled slightly. His small hand crept across the white floor, not reaching, just extending. The same gesture he'd made with Dominic, an offering of connection to someone who might understand. Nora placed her hand next to his, not touching, just close enough to be felt. They sat like that, the broken boy and the scarred woman. 2 people who understood that some wounds don't close, some damage doesn't heal. You just learn to carry it differently. After 5 minutes, Asher's hand moved the remaining inch and touched hers. Nora didn't react, didn't smile, didn't make a big deal of it, didn't treat it like the miracle it was. She just sat there with him, breathing, being present, offering the rarest gift one survivor could give another. Witness without judgment. After 10 minutes, Nora stood up, slowly, giving Asher time to adjust, time to prepare for the loss of contact. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. She walked out of the room. Dominic closed and locked the door behind them. In the corridor, Nora turned to him. "I'll take the job. Just like that? Just like that." She started walking toward the stairs. "But I have conditions. 1, I'm not a miracle worker. 2, I'm not a nanny. 3, if you ever lock that child in a cage again without consulting me first, I walk. Understood?" Dominic bristled. No one spoke to him like that. No one gave him ultimatums in his own house. Not pack members, not council elders, certainly not human contractors. But he thought of Asher's hand reaching across the floor. Thought of the way the boy had responded to Nora in 5 minutes more than he'd responded to anyone in 8 months. "Understood," he said. "Good." She reached the top of the stairs and turned back. "Also, those tapestries in your east wing? They're genuine 16th century, Flemish, worth about 4 million if properly restored. If you actually want me to work on them, it'll cost extra." Despite everything, Dominic almost smiled. "How much extra?" "Double." "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Ashford." "I learned from experts, Mr. Ravencroft." She held his gaze. "And for the record, you're not hiring me to save your son. You're hiring me to teach you how to save him yourself. Because when I leave in 6 months, you're the one who's going to be here, not me. The real work starts after I'm gone." She walked out without waiting for a response. Dominic stood in the hallway, listening to her footsteps fade, listening to the old house settle around him, listening to the rain that had started falling again outside. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. It was a dangerous thing. Hope. It made you vulnerable. Made you believe in possibilities that probability said were impossible. Made you stupid enough to fight battles you should surrender. But standing there in the hallway of his ancestral home, with a broken child in the basement and a dying bloodline hanging over his head and 57 days until the council made their decision, Dominic let himself hope anyway. Because what else was there? He returned to his study and poured himself a drink. This time he drank it. Let the burn ground him. Let the alcohol remind him he was still flesh and blood under the alpha mantle. Sebastian found him there an hour later. "I heard we hired someone new," Sebastian said from the doorway. His tone was carefully neutral, the voice of a man who had learned to hide his opinions until they could be weaponized. "We did." "Human?" "Yes." "For the boy?" "Yes." Sebastian walked in and sat down without being invited. They'd known each other long enough that formality was a mask they didn't bother wearing anymore, or at least they used to not bother. "This is a mistake, Dom." "Noted." "I'm serious. Bringing an outsider into the house, giving her access to Asher, to our secrets. What happens when she figures out what we really are? She's here to work, not investigate. You're naive if you think she won't notice." Sebastian leaned forward. His scent carried the sharp edge of genuine concern mixed with something darker. "And what happens in 60 days when the council votes? When we have to explain why we're harboring a human in the Alpha's house? They'll see it as weakness, as desperation." "It is desperation." "Then don't advertise it." Sebastian's voice hardened, edge creeping in where there used to be only loyalty. "Dominic, I've stood beside you for 27 years. I've followed you into battles we had no business winning. I've trusted your instincts even when they defied logic. But this feels like giving up." Dominic set down his glass with controlled precision. "What would you have me do?" "Accept reality. Asher is broken. He's not going to lead this pack. The kindest thing you can do is send him somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, where he can live out his days without the pressure of being an heir he'll never be capable of becoming." "You mean a facility?" "I mean mercy." The word hung between them like a blade. Dominic thought of Ethan, of Sebastian carrying his own son to execution, of the man who had emerged from that room with empty eyes and a hole in his soul that would never fill, of the friendship that had fractured that day and never quite healed right. "I can't," Dominic said quietly. "Can't or won't?" "Both." Sebastian stood up. His face was unreadable. Walls behind walls behind walls. "Then I hope you know what you're doing. Because in 60 days, the council isn't going to accept hope as a strategic plan. They're going to demand proof. And if you can't provide it, they'll remove you. And then someone else will make the decision you're too weak to make." He left without another word. Dominic sat alone in the dark study, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of the crown pressing down. 57 days. Everything would change. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, his son had reached out to another human being. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep fighting. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The old stones of Ravencroft Manor absorbed it like they had absorbed 400 years of storms, solid, immovable, eternal. But even stones, Dominic knew, could erode. Even mountains could fall. The question was whether they would fall with honor or dissolve into dust. He looked at his hands. 52 years old, scarred from 1,000 fights, still strong, still capable. But how much longer? How many more storms could he weather? How many more funerals could he attend before it was his own? These were the thoughts that haunted him in the dark hours. The thoughts he couldn't share with the pack, couldn't admit to the council, could barely admit to himself. He was afraid, not of death. He'd made peace with that long ago. Every alpha knew they would die younger than they should, knew they would burn bright and fast and leave ash behind. Number. What terrified him was dying without meaning, without legacy, without proof that his 30 years of rule had amounted to something more than just delaying the inevitable. And right now, his legacy was a traumatized 4-year-old who couldn't speak, and a bloodline that was eating itself alive. Unless Nora Ashford could work a miracle, unless 57 days was enough, unless hope was more than just another word for denial. Dominic stood and walked to the window. Below, he could see Nora's car still parked in the driveway. She hadn't left yet, was probably with Martha getting settled, learning the layout, preparing for tomorrow. She had looked at Asher with understanding, not pity. She had shown him her scars, not her strength. She had offered presents, not promises. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all any of them could offer in the end. Presence in the face of pain, companionship in the long dark, a hand reaching across the void, not to save, but to share the burden of falling. Dominic pressed his palm against the cold glass and closed his eyes. 57 days. Let it be enough. Nora Ashford had been at Ravencroft Manor for exactly 5 weeks when Elder Cornelius arrived unannounced and changed everything. 5 weeks. 35 days of the 60 she'd been promised. 35 days of careful progress and small victories. 35 days of teaching a traumatized child that the world didn't have to be a constant threat. The first week had passed in a rhythm of establishment. Nora moved into the East Wing with the efficiency of someone who had learned to travel light. 2 suitcases, a laptop, a worn leather journal that she kept locked in her nightstand, filled with memories she couldn't share and nightmares she couldn't escape. She asked for nothing beyond what was offered and accepted nothing beyond what was necessary. Martha liked her immediately. Sebastian watched her with the suspicion of a man who had learned that trust was a luxury that got people killed. Dominic found himself doing both. He watched from his study window as Nora established her routine. Every morning at 7, she would walk the perimeter of the estate. Not jogging, just walking, hands in pockets, face turned up to whatever weather the October sky decided to throw at her. She moved like someone performing a meditation, or a reconnaissance, probably both. At 8, she would spend an hour in the archives, examining the tapestries with the meticulous care of a surgeon. She had explained that restoration was as much about understanding the story woven into the fabric as it was about repairing the physical damage. Each thread had meaning. Each color had purpose. Each generation's additions told you what they valued enough to immortalize. Dominic understood the metaphor better than she knew. At 9, she would go to Asher. The containment room was no longer locked from the outside. That had been Nora's first demand after she'd officially accepted the position. She had looked Dominic in the eye and said, "If you want him to learn control, you have to give him the opportunity to choose it. Cages don't teach discipline. They teach helplessness. They teach that the world is something that happens to you, not something you can navigate." Dominic had wanted to argue, had wanted to explain about liability and safety protocols, and the 17 incidents in the past 8 months that had resulted in property damage or injury, or both. But he had looked at Asher's face through the window, at the empty eyes, at the defeated slump of shoulders too small to carry so much resignation, and he had given Nora the code. Now, after 3 days, Asher could leave the room whenever he wanted, and every morning he chose to stay until Nora arrived. She would sit with him for 3 hours. Sometimes they drew together, Asher's crude stick figures slowly gaining detail as his fine motor control returned. Sometimes she read aloud from children's books that seemed too young for him, until Dominic realized they were exactly right for a mind that had regressed to protect itself from memories too terrible to process. Sometimes they just sat in silence, breathing the same air, occupying the same space, proving that presence didn't require performance. It didn't look like therapy, it looked like companionship. But slowly, incrementally, Asher was changing. On day 3, he looked at Nora when she entered instead of turning away. On day 5, he handed her a crayon without being asked. On day 7, he laughed. Just once. Just for a moment, when Nora made an exaggerated face while reading a story about a grumpy troll. But the sound cut through the manor like sunlight through prison bars. Dominic had been walking past the room when he heard it. He had frozen in the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall to steady himself, feeling something break open in his chest that he didn't have words for. His son had laughed. For 8 months there had been only silence and screaming. And now, laughter. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't even close to recovery. But it was a direction. A trajectory that pointed towards something other than darkness. That night, Dominic knocked on Nora's door. She answered in sweatpants and a faded army t-shirt, her hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked younger without the armor of daytime competence, more human, more vulnerable. Mr. Ravencroft. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Is something wrong? I heard Asher laugh today. She leaned against the doorframe. He did, just once. Might not happen again for a while. Progress isn't linear. I don't care. It happened. He realized he was gripping the doorframe, forced himself to relax. I wanted to thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're a long way from done. We have 53 days left, and most of the hard work is still ahead. Still, she studied him with those gray eyes that saw too much. That cut through pretense like scalpels. You haven't spent much time with him since I arrived. Why? The question was direct, unadorned, the way she asked everything. I thought it was better to give you space, to let you establish rapport without me interfering. That's a lie. Dominic's spine stiffened. Excuse me? You're avoiding him because watching him hurt makes you hurt. And you don't know what to do with that pain except turn it into anger or duty or distance. She crossed her arms. But he needs you, Dominic. Not the alpha, not the provider. You, his father. The man who sits on the floor with him, even when it breaks your heart. No one spoke to him like this. No one called him by his first name without permission. No one stripped away his defenses and pointed at the raw wounds beneath. He should have been furious. Instead, he felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been held too tight for too long. I don't know how to be what he needs, Dominic said quietly. Neither do I. Nora's expression softened. But we can figure it out together. Tomorrow, join us. Not as an observer, as a participant. Get on the floor. Draw with crayons, read the stupid troll book, be ridiculous. That's what he needs. Not strength, not solutions, just presence. Dominic thought about the last time he had been ridiculous. Couldn't remember. 30 years of being alpha had trained all the softness out of him. All the playfulness. All the parts of himself that weren't weapons or shields or tools for pack survival. I don't know if I remember how, he said. Then it's time to learn. She started to close the door, then paused. And Dominic? Stop calling yourself Mr. Ravencroft around me. You hired me to see your son as a person, not a problem. That starts with you seeing yourself the same way. The door clicked shut. Dominic stood in the hallway, feeling like he'd just been outmaneuvered by a superior strategist. It was not an unpleasant feeling. The next morning, day 8, he joined them. Asher looked up in surprise when Dominic entered the room. Not fear, not wariness, just surprise. As if he'd forgotten he had a father who might show up for something other than checking containment protocols. The realization hurt worse than silver. Nora gestured to a spot on the floor beside her. Dominic sat, his expensive suit completely unsuited to sitting cross-legged on padded flooring. He felt ridiculous, oversized, a wolf trying to fit into a rabbit's burrow. We're building a city today, Nora said, pushing a box of wooden blocks toward him. Asher is the architect. We're the construction crew. We do what he tells us. Asher looked at the blocks, then at Dominic, then back at the blocks, processing this new variable in his carefully controlled environment. Slowly, carefully, he picked up a red square and placed it in the center of the floor. Nora picked up a blue rectangle and placed it next to the red square. She looked at Asher. Good? Asher considered, then nodded. Dominic picked up a yellow triangle. He had negotiated treaties between hostile pacts, had commanded defensive actions in territory disputes that left bodies in the forest, had stared down alphas twice his size and made them blink first. He had no idea what to do with a yellow triangle in a child's block game. He placed it on top of the red square, looked at Asher. The boy frowned, removed the triangle, placed it beside the blue rectangle instead. Dominic nodded seriously. "You're right, better structural integrity that way." Nora snorted, almost laughed, covered it with a cough. They built for an hour. A city of blocks that made no architectural sense but had its own internal logic that existed only in Asher's healing mind. Asher didn't speak, but he directed them with gestures, pointing, rearranging, building something that existed only in his imagination and was slowly taking shape in the physical world. When it was done, Asher sat back and looked at it. Then he looked at Dominic, and he smiled. It was small, tentative, the smile of someone who had forgotten how and was remembering in real time. But it was there. Dominic felt his eyes burn, felt his vision blur, felt 30 years of armor crack straight down the middle. "It's beautiful, pup," he said. His voice was rough, barely controlled. "You made something beautiful." Asher's smile widened just a fraction. Then he reached out and very carefully knocked over a single blue block. The city collapsed in a cascade of wood and color. Dominic's first instinct was frustration. All that work, all that careful construction, gone in a second. But Asher was laughing. That same bright sound from yesterday. And Nora was laughing too. And Dominic realized this was the lesson, this was the point. Build, destroy, build again. Nothing is permanent, everything changes. And that's okay. That's survival. So Dominic laughed too, and the three of them sat in the ruins of the block city, laughing at the beautiful impermanence of it all. Later, when Asher had fallen asleep in his bed, the destroyed city carefully reconstructed by the boy so he could destroy it again tomorrow. Nora and Dominic walked back upstairs together. "That was good," Nora said. "He needed to see you play, needed to see that adults can be safe and unpredictable at the same time." "I needed to remember how," Dominic admitted. They reached the landing. Nora started to turn toward her wing, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happened to his mother? Really? Not the sanitized version, the truth." Dominic had known this question was coming, had prepared answers, partial truths, protective lies. But standing there in the quiet house with this woman who had somehow become more than an employee in just 8 days, he found he didn't want to lie. "She was killed, here, in our bedroom 3 years ago." "By whom?" "We don't know. Asher was sleeping in our bed that night, a storm. He was afraid of thunder. He woke up screaming. By the time I got there from my study, Isabel was dead, and Asher was covered in her blood. And he hasn't been right since." "No suspects?" "We investigated, exhaustively. There was no forced entry, no signs of struggle beyond defensive wounds on Isabel's hands, no forensic evidence beyond Isabel's blood and Asher's presence." Dominic's hands clenched. "It's like she was killed by a ghost, or something that didn't leave evidence normal investigations could find." Nora was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think Asher saw who did it?" "I think he saw something that traumatized him so deeply he can't process it, can't speak about it, can only relive it in nightmares." "Has he ever drawn it, the thing he saw?" Dominic thought of the drawings, the shapeless dark masses, the figures without faces. "He draws shadows, darkness, nothing concrete, nothing that gives us answers." "Shadows," Nora repeated. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "Dominic, when Asher has his episodes, what exactly happens? Describe it precisely." "He screams, destroys things. Sometimes he seems to disappear into corners. The light doesn't reach him right. It's like he's—" Dominic trailed off, realizing how insane it sounded to someone who didn't know what ran in wolf bloodlines. "Like he's slipping between places," Nora finished. "Yes," she nodded slowly. "I've seen something like that before. In theater. Soldiers with severe PTSD who would dissociate so completely they seem to vanish into themselves. The mind trying to escape what the body can't flee. It's a survival mechanism, extreme but functional." It was a rational explanation, a human explanation. Dominic wanted to believe it, but he knew better. He knew what ran in Ravencroft blood, knew what shadow-touched children could become if the gene expressed fully. "Thank you," he said, "for helping him, for helping me. We're not done yet. We've got 53 days left until the summit. And then what happens? You've never told me what the real stakes are. Then we see if it was enough. Enough for what? Dominic looked at her. At this human woman who had walked into his world with no idea what she was really dealing with. Who was giving his son back piece by piece through patience and presence. She deserved the truth, but the truth would put her in danger, would make her a target, would force her to carry secrets that could get her killed. So he said, enough for me to know he'll be okay when I'm gone. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Nora searched his face. She knew he was holding back, knew there were layers he wasn't showing her, but she nodded. 53 days, let's make them count. She turned and walked to her room. Dominic watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Something dangerous and complicated, and entirely inappropriate given their circumstances. Respect, admiration. And underneath it all, the faint electric pull of what his wolf insisted was a mate bond. He pushed the feeling down, locked it away. He didn't have time for that kind of complication. 53 days. The summit was coming. The weeks blurred into a new rhythm. Days became a cycle of small progress and careful hope. By week 2, Asher began venturing out of the containment room voluntarily. First to the hallway, then to the kitchen where Martha would have fresh cookies waiting. Then, cautiously, into the gardens where October was turning the leaves to fire. By week 3, day 21, Dominic joined the sessions with Nora every morning. It became the part of his day he looked forward to most. Not the political maneuvering, not the business decisions. Just sitting on the floor with his son, building cities that would fall, drawing pictures of dragons and castles, reading stories about brave mice and friendly giants. Asher still didn't speak, but he communicated in other ways. A tug on Dominic's sleeve meant follow me. A drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands meant family. A rare, precious hug meant I love you even though I can't say it. Dominic learned to read the language of silence, and somewhere in that learning, he began to heal too. But on day 25, the outside world came crashing in. Dominic was in his study reviewing pack finances when Elder Cornelius arrived unannounced. The old man looked even more ancient than at the funeral, as if the weight of centuries was finally catching up to his bones. I hear you've made progress with the boy, Cornelius said without preamble. He's improving, not cured, but better. Good, because the summit has been moved up. Dominic felt ice form in his veins. What? Alpha Ironwood is dying. Alpha decay progressing rapidly. He has weeks, not months. The council decided to convene early rather than wait for his death and deal with pack instability. The summit will be in 30 days, not 60. 30 days, less than half of what they'd planned for. 25 days of progress, 30 days remaining. Still no words from Asher. Still episodes, still shadows. That's not enough time, Dominic said. It's the time you have. Cornelius stood, his joints creaking. The vote will happen whether you're ready or not. Show us that the Ravencroft line has a future, or accept absorption. Those are your options. And if I refuse both, then you'll be removed, by force if necessary. Cornelius's ancient eyes held something that might have been pity. I don't want that, Dominic. You've been a good alpha, a strong leader. But the survival of our kind is bigger than any one pack, bigger than any one bloodline. We're dying, and sentiment won't keep us alive. What about honor? What about 400 years of unbroken lineage? Honor doesn't keep the lights on. Lineage doesn't protect us from extinction. Cornelius moved toward the door. 30 days, Dominic, make them count. He left. Dominic sat in the study, feeling the floor shift beneath him. 30 days. It wasn't enough. Couldn't be enough. Asher had made progress, yes, but he still didn't speak. Still had episodes. Still slipped into shadows when overwhelmed. He was better, but he wasn't whole. And at the summit, in front of 7 alphas and the entire Elder Council, any sign of weakness would be fatal. He went to find Nora. She was in the archives, working on one of the tapestries. Her hands moved with practiced precision, threading new fiber through old, repairing what time had damaged. If only children were so simple. We have a problem, Dominic said. She didn't look up from her work. Only one? The timeline just got cut in half. We have 30 days instead of 55. Now she looked up. 30 days until what exactly? You've been dancing around this since I arrived. Tell me what's really happening. Dominic realized he'd never explained the full situation. Had never told her about the Consolidation Act. About what was really at stake. About the fact that his entire pack's survival depended on a traumatized 4-year-old performing normalcy in front of a council in 30 days. So he told her now. Everything. The dying bloodlines, the weakening alphas, the summit vote that would determine whether Ravencroft Pack survived or was absorbed into history. Nora listened in silence. When he finished, she set down her tools and stood up. You're telling me that your entire pack's future depends on whether Asher can convince a council of judgmental wolves that he's worthy in 30 days? Yes. That's insane. That's politics. She paced, something she never did, always so controlled. But now her composure cracked just enough to show the anger underneath. Dominic, he's 4 years old. He's traumatized. He's making progress, but he's not a trained SEAL. I can't make him ready for that kind of pressure. And you shouldn't ask him to bear that weight. I'm not asking you to make him ready. I'm asking you to help me find another way. What other way? Dominic had been thinking about this since Cornelius left, turning it over in his mind, examining it from every angle, looking for the strategic opening. What if we don't need Asher to prove he can be an alpha right now? What if we prove the bloodline itself is still viable? That the shadow gene isn't a death sentence? How? The shadow-touched gene. It runs in Ravencroft blood. Always has. Usually it skips generations. Sometimes it emerges and has to be. He paused, thinking of Ethan. Of Sebastian's son. Managed. Managed, Nora repeated. Her voice was flat, dangerous. What does that mean? It means historically, children who showed shadow traits were executed. To prevent the madness from spreading. To protect the pack from the risk. The color drained from Nora's face. You're telling me there's a law that says your son should be killed? Was a law. I changed it when Asher was born. Made it illegal to execute shadow-touched children without council approval. But the fear remains, the prejudice. The council thinks he's dangerous, unstable, a threat to pack stability. And you want to prove he's not. I want to prove the shadow gene isn't a curse. It's an evolution, a strength, not a weakness. Dominic pulled a folder from his desk. These are records, historical accounts of shadow-touched Ravencrofts who weren't killed, who lived full lives. They were some of our greatest warriors, our most effective leaders. The gene doesn't cause madness. Trauma causes madness, and we've been traumatizing these children by treating them as monsters from birth. Nora took the folder, flipped through it. Her expression shifted from horror to fascination to something that might have been hope. This is remarkable research. Why haven't you presented this to the council before? Because without a living example, it's just theory, ancient history. They need to see Asher, need to see him functional, controlled, worthy. In 30 days. In 30 days, Nora closed the folder and looked at him. Really looked at him. Seeing past the alpha, past the father. Seeing the man who was drowning in impossible choices and refusing to go quietly. Okay, she said. We try. But Dominic, you need to understand something. Even if Asher is perfect at that summit, even if he speaks and smiles and shows every sign of being a functional child, there's no guarantee they'll accept him. Politics doesn't run on merit. It runs on fear and power. I know. And if they don't, what then? Dominic thought of Cornelius's words. Removal by force. Thought of Isabel's death. Thought of the shadows that seemed to follow his son wherever he went. Then I make them accept him, he said quietly. Whatever it takes. Nora held his gaze. And in that moment, Dominic saw that she understood. Understood that he was walking toward a cliff edge and fully intended to jump if that's what it required. Whatever it takes, she echoed. Be careful with words like that, Dominic. They have a way of demanding payment you can't afford. She handed back the folder and returned to her tapestry work. Dominic stood there, watching her hands move with surgical precision. Repairing, restoring, making whole what had been broken. He wondered if she knew how much he wanted those hands to do the same for him. That night, day 25, Nora woke screaming. Dominic was in the hallway before conscious thought caught up to instinct. He didn't remember leaving his bed, didn't remember running. Just suddenly he was at her door, hand on the knob, Wolf surging forward demanding he protect his mate. Not mate, employee, human off limits. He knocked, hard. Nora, it's Dominic. Silence. Then movement. The door opened. She stood there in an oversized t-shirt, hair wild, eyes haunted. Her scent was thick with fear sweat and adrenaline. Nightmare, she said, voice rough. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. She was shaking. But she was also closing the door. Let me help, Dominic said. There's nothing to help with. Go back to bed. Nora? She stopped. Shoulders slumped. and for the first time since she'd arrived, her armor fully cracked. "It was Marcus," she said quietly. "My husband. I dream about the day he died, about finding him, about the blood." She looked up at Dominic with eyes that had seen too much. "I tell everyone he killed himself. PTSD. Tragic but explicable. But that's not the whole truth." "What's the truth?" "He tried to rob a bank. Needed money for something his damaged brain convinced him was critical. The police surrounded him. He pointed an unloaded gun at them. Suicide by cop." Her voice cracked. "I found his journal afterward. He'd written, 'I'm sorry, Nora. I love you, but I can't do this anymore.' So I lied. Told everyone it was PTSD. Took the life insurance money. Started over." "That's not a lie. That was PTSD, just not the kind that comes with a diagnosis." "Was it? Or was he just broken? Just damaged beyond repair and I was too weak to see it?" Dominic stepped into the room without asking permission. Closed the door behind him. Faced her fully. "You survived a war. Lost your brother. Watched your husband deteriorate. Kept going anyway. That's not weakness. That's the opposite. Then why do I keep seeing his face? Why do I wake up convinced I could have saved him if I'd just been better, smarter, stronger?" "Because that's what survivors do. We carry the dead. We ask what if. We torture ourselves with scenarios where we were enough." Dominic moved closer. "But Nora, you're human. You can't save everyone, and trying will just break you." She laughed, bitter, broken. "Too late." "No." He reached out, cupped her face. "You're scarred, not broken. There's a difference." She leaned into his touch, just for a moment. Just long enough for Dominic to feel the warmth of her skin, the flutter of her pulse. Then she pulled back. "Thank you," she said, "for not judging. We're all carrying bodies, Nora. Mine just happened to be the ones I ordered killed." She looked at him, understanding passing between them. Two people who had done terrible things for reasons they told themselves were necessary. "Get some sleep," Dominic said. "Tomorrow we keep trying." "Tomorrow we keep trying," she agreed. He left, went back to his room, lay awake for hours thinking about the woman down the hall who was just as damaged as his son, and wondering if any of them would survive the next 30 days intact. 27 days before the summit, Sebastian confronted him. It was late. Dominic was in his study reviewing legal documents, looking for loopholes in the Consolidation Act. Ways to delay, ways to fight. Sebastian walked in without knocking, without permission, his scent carrying aggression and resignation in equal measure. "We need to talk," Sebastian said. "I'm busy. I don't care." Sebastian closed the door behind him, locked it. "I've been watching Nora Ashford. Did my own background check beyond what the council provided." Dominic set down his pen. "And?" "Her husband didn't die from PTSD suicide. He was killed trying to rob a bank. Suicide by cop. And she lied about it. Took the life insurance money. Started over with a false narrative." "I know." Sebastian paused. "You know? I did the same background check you did. Probably deeper. Marcus Ashford came back from deployment with brain damage, TBI from an IED. He wasn't in his right mind. Nora tried to get him help. The VA failed him. He spiraled. And yes, he made a catastrophic choice. And yes, she lied to protect his memory. Wouldn't you?" "That's not the point. The point is she's a liar. She can't be trusted with your son. Can't be trusted with PAC security. She can be trusted to help Asher. That's all that matters." Sebastian's face hardened. "Is it? Or is there something else going on here?" "Meaning?" "Meaning I've seen how you look at her. How you find excuses to be near her. How you've smiled more in the past month than you have in the past 3 years." Sebastian leaned forward. "You're developing feelings for your employee, for a human, and it's clouding your judgment, making you weak precisely when we need you to be strong." Dominic stood up slowly. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. The voice of an alpha who had reached the limit of insubordination he would tolerate. "Careful, Sebastian. Someone has to say it. You're compromised. You're making decisions based on emotion instead of strategy. And in 30 days, that's going to cost us everything." "What would you have me do? Send her away? Go back to keeping Asher locked in a cage? Give up?" "I'd have you accept reality. Asher is broken. He's not going to lead this pack. The shadow gene will express, and when it does, he'll go mad like they all do. And the kindest thing you can do is let him go. Send him somewhere safe, somewhere far from summit politics and council expectations. Let him live whatever life he can without the weight of a crown he'll never be capable of wearing." You mean kill him? The words hung in the air like a blade. Sebastian's face went pale. I never said that. But that's what you mean. Send him to a mercy facility. Let him fade away quietly. Just like you had to do with Ethan. Don't! Sebastian's voice shook. Don't you dare use my son against me. Don't you dare compare what I had to do with your selfishness. Then don't ask me to kill mine. I'm asking you to make an impossible choice before it's made for you. I'm asking you to be alpha instead of father. Because you can't be both. Not anymore. The pack needs a leader, not a grieving parent. Dominic walked around the desk, stood face to face with the man who had been his brother in all but blood for nearly 3 decades. I've been alpha for 30 years, Dominic said quietly. I've made the hard choices, enforced the brutal laws, sacrificed everything personal for the good of the pack. I gave the order that killed your son. I've sent dozens of wolves to their deaths for territory and honor, and laws I didn't even write. And where has it gotten us? We're dying anyway. The bloodline is failing anyway. The packs are collapsing anyway. So maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to be a father first, and see if that saves us, instead of this endless sacrifice to tradition. Sebastian looked at him with something that might have been pity, or contempt, or grief for the man Dominic used to be. Then you've already lost, Sebastian said. He turned and walked to the door, unlocked it, paused with his hand on the handle. When the council votes against you in 30 days, when they force consolidation and take your son, don't say I didn't warn you. Don't say I didn't try to save you from yourself. He left. Dominic stood alone in the study, feeling the foundation crack beneath him. He had always known this day might come. The day when loyalty and friendship weren't enough to bridge the gap between what needed to be done and what he was willing to do. Sebastian wasn't wrong. Dominic was compromised, was making choices based on hope instead of probability, was risking everything on the impossible dream that his broken son could somehow be enough. But what was the alternative? Surrender? Extinction with dignity? Killing Asher to preserve pack stability? Dominic had never been good at surrender. He returned to his desk and kept working, kept searching for loopholes, for strategies, for anything that might buy them more time. Midnight came and went, then 1 a.m., then 2. A soft knock on the door pulled him from the documents. Come in. Nora entered, wrapped in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. Saw your light on. Couldn't sleep either? Work to do. She closed the door and crossed to the desk, looked at the papers spread across the surface. Legal briefs, historical precedents, council bylaws. You're not going to find the answer in there, she said. Maybe not, but I have to try. She pulled up a chair and sat down. Tell me about her. About Isabel. Dominic looked up, surprised. Why? Because you've told me how she died. But you've never told me who she was. And I think you need to. Dominic leaned back. He was so tired. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of being strong when strength felt like just another word for stubborn refusal to admit defeat. She was perfect, he said. By wolf standards, pure bloodline, excellent breeding, intelligent, capable. Everything an alpha's mate should be. Did you love her? The question was direct, unflinching, very Nora. Dominic answered with the same honesty. I respected her, admired her, built a partnership with her. But love? The kind that poets write about? The kind that makes you stupid and vulnerable and willing to burn the world? No, we both knew what we were. A political alliance, a genetic merger. It worked. It was enough. Was it? I thought so. Until she died. And I realized I'd wasted years with a woman I never really knew. Never let myself know. Because knowing her would have meant being vulnerable. And alphas don't do vulnerable. We do duty. We do strength. We do whatever serves the pack. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My husband and I were together for 12 years when he died. High school sweethearts, married at 22. We were going to grow old together, have a house full of kids, the whole American dream. What happened? War happened. He came back different. The TBI changed his personality, made him angry, paranoid, violent. He'd wake up swinging, thought I was the enemy. I tried to help. God, I tried. But he was drowning and he pulled us both down with him. I'm sorry. Me too. But here's what I learned. Love isn't enough. Partnership isn't enough. You can do everything right and still lose, still fail, still end up alone at 2 a.m. wondering where it all went wrong. She reached across the desk and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, calloused, real. But you keep trying anyway, she said. Because the alternative is giving up. and neither of us is built for that." Dominic looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of her smaller fingers against his, at the way they fit together without either one yielding. "I don't know how this ends," he said quietly. "The summit, Asher, any of it. Neither do I. But we've got 30 days to figure it out." She squeezed his hand once and let go. "Get some sleep, Dominic. You're no good to anyone exhausted." She stood to leave. "Nora," she turned. "Thank you. For everything. For your vulnerability tonight. For trusting me with your truth." She smiled. Small, tired, genuine. "We're not done yet." She left him alone in the study with papers and possibilities, and the lingering warmth of her hand in his. Dominic sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then he stood up, turned off the light, and went to bed. Tomorrow they would keep trying, keep fighting, keep hoping against hope that 30 days would be enough. And if it wasn't, well, he'd burn that bridge when he came to it. In his room down the hall, Asher slept fitfully, dreaming of shadows and lost mothers, and the man who wanted to be his father but didn't know how. In the East Wing, Nora lay awake, thinking about broken children and impossible timelines, and the Alpha who looked at her like she might be the answer to a question he was afraid to ask. And in the guest quarters, Sebastian sat at his desk, composing an encrypted message to the Council. A message detailing Asher's episodes, the shadow manifestations, the risks. A message he told himself was for the good of the pack. A message that would change everything. 30 days. The clock was ticking, and none of them were ready for what was coming. 23 days remained when Asher spoke his first word. It happened during breakfast on day 32 of Nora's residency at Ravencroft Manor. Dominic was reading the newspaper, still hoping for good news about markets or politics, still finding only evidence of a world grinding forward without care for the struggles of dying bloodlines. Nora was sketching lesson plans for the day's session, planning activities that would continue the careful building of trust and communication. Martha was making pancakes, the kitchen filled with the comforting smell of butter and maple syrup, and Asher was sitting at the table, pushing pieces of fruit around his plate in geometric patterns that probably meant something in the architecture of his healing mind. Normal, domestic, the kind of scene that belonged in a life neither Dominic nor his son had ever been allowed to live. Then Asher picked up his orange juice glass, looked at it, and said, clear as daylight, "More." The newspaper crumpled in Dominic's hands. Nora's pencil stopped mid-stroke. Martha turned from the stove, spatula frozen in midair, her eyes suddenly wet. Asher looked at each of them in turn, confused by the sudden attention, by the wave of emotion that had crashed through the kitchen at a single syllable. He held up the glass again. "More, please." Dominic's vision blurred. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to maintain some shred of composure. But the tears came anyway. His son had spoken. After 14 months of silence, his son had asked for orange juice. "Of course, sweetheart," Martha said, her own voice thick with emotion. She crossed to the table and refilled the glass with shaking hands. "As much as you want. As much as you'll ever want." Asher drank, set down the glass, went back to arranging his fruit like nothing world-changing had just occurred, as if he hadn't just shattered and rebuilt his father's entire world with 2 words and please. Nora reached across the table and squeezed Dominic's hand. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. "This is real. This is happening. Your son is coming back, and we still have 23 days. We might actually pull this off." That afternoon, Dominic called an emergency meeting with his senior staff, not to discuss business or territory or the 1,000 administrative details that kept a pack running, to discuss possibility, to discuss hope. "He's speaking," Dominic told the assembled wolves, his inner circle of advisors and protectors who had watched Asher's decline with the same helpless grief Dominic had felt. Not fluently, not consistently, but he's using words, making requests, engaging with the world again. The room erupted in cautious celebration. These were wolves who had watched Asher's decline, who had seen the empty-eyed child locked in the basement, who had begun to mourn the heir they thought they'd lost, who had started making quiet plans for a pack merger that seemed inevitable. Hope was a dangerous thing to offer them, but it was the only thing Dominic had left to give. "We have 23 days until the summit," he continued. 23 days to prepare him, to show the Council that the Ravencroft line has a future. I need everyone's support, everyone's discretion. No one outside this pack can know about his progress, until we're ready to reveal it. His head of security, Marcus, raised a hand, a blunt wolf who had served Dominic's father before him. What about the leak risk? Someone's been feeding information to other packs. We've had too many coincidental timing issues to be random chance. Too many strategic details ending up in enemy hands. Dominic had known about the leak for weeks, had suspected, had watched communication patterns, had narrowed it down to 3 possible sources, one of whom was sitting in this room. "I'm aware," Dominic said, letting his gaze sweep the assembled faces, letting them know he was watching. "And I'm handling it. For now, we operate on need-to-know basis. Asher's progress stays within this room. Understood?" Nods around the table. Promises of loyalty. Assurances of discretion that might or might not be worth the air they were spoken into. Dominic looked at each face, trying to see who was sincere, who was performing, who was already composing the message they'd send the moment this meeting ended. His eyes landed on Sebastian. His beta sat perfectly still, expression neutral, body language giving nothing away. But there was something in his scent, something dark and resigned. The smell of a man who had already made his choice and was waiting for consequences. 18 days before the summit, Alpha Ironwood died. The news came at dawn. Dominic received the call from Elder Cornelius while he was in the gym, trying to outrun his thoughts on a treadmill that went nowhere, trying to burn off the anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. "He passed in his sleep," Cornelius said without preamble. "Peacefully. His beta has assumed interim control, but Ironwood Pack is vulnerable, leaderless. Exactly the scenario the Consolidation Act was designed to address." "Let me guess," Dominic said, breathing hard, sweat dripping onto the treadmill controls. "The vote will now include absorbing Ironwood immediately. The vote will include dissolving Ironwood and distributing their territory among the remaining 6 packs. Yes." Cornelius paused. "This is what extinction looks like, Dominic. 1 pack at a time. 1 alpha at a time. Until there's nothing left but stories and warning labels in history books." "We're not dead yet." "No, but the window is closing. 18 days, make them count." The line went dead. Dominic stopped the treadmill, stood there breathing hard, sweating, feeling the walls close in like a tomb under construction. Ironwood had been an ally. A vote Dominic could have counted on. Now that vote was gone. And in its place was a feeding frenzy. 6 packs circling wounded territory like sharks scenting blood in the water. He needed a new strategy, a new alliance, a new way to tip the balance when the mathematics of survival were working against him. He found Nora in the archives. She was working on the final tapestry, the one that had been left incomplete, the one meant to depict Dominic's reign and legacy. She had restored it beautifully, had filled in the missing threads with colors that matched the original dyes perfectly, had rewoven the story of his 30 years as Alpha. The battles won, the treaties signed, the pack protected and grown and shepherded through crisis after crisis. But the center remained empty, a blank space where the heir should be depicted, where the future should be guaranteed in thread and tradition. "It's beautiful," Dominic said from the doorway. Nora didn't turn from her work. Her hands continued their precise movements. "It's a lie. This tapestry shows strength, certainty, an unbroken line marching confidently into the future. But the truth is more complicated, more fragile. The truth usually is." She set down her tools and finally looked at him, saw something in his face that made her expression shift. "Ironwood died. News travels fast. Martha told me. She's worried. Says the other packs will see it as an opportunity, that they'll vote to carve up Ravencroft next, that we're running out of time and allies." "She's not wrong. Then we need to give them a reason not to." Nora stood up, brushing thread from her jeans. "I have an idea. You're not going to like it. Tell me anyway." "Bring Asher to the summit." Dominic felt ice form in his chest, spreading out from his heart like frost on a window. "Absolutely not. Listen to me. You've been preparing legal arguments, political strategies, ways to convince them through logic and precedent. But wolves don't respond to logic when they're afraid. They respond to strength, to proof. You need to show them Asher. Let them see he's real, functional, worthy of the legacy he's meant to carry. He's 4 years old. The pressure of performing in front of 7 packs, in front of the entire council, would break him, would undo everything we've accomplished. Then don't make him perform. Make him present. Let him be himself. Let them see that the shadow gene isn't a curse or a death sentence. It's just part of who he is, part of what makes him Ravencroft. And if he has an episode in front of the council, If he shifts, if he slips into the shadows in front of everyone, then you stand beside him and show them that even in his worst moment, he's still your son, still the heir, still the future. Nora crossed to him, placed a hand on his chest over his heart. They need to see you as a father, Dominic, not just an alpha executing duty. Because right now, what our kind needs most isn't more strength. It's humanity, connection, proof that we're more than just predators in politics. Our kind, she'd said our kind, as if somewhere in the past 32 days she'd stopped being an outsider, had become part of the pack, part of the family, part of something Dominic was terrified to name because naming it would make it real, and real things could be taken away. If I bring him and it goes wrong, they'll use it as justification to take him from me, Dominic said quietly. They'll say I endangered him, that I'm unfit, that the compassionate thing is removal to a facility. And if you don't bring him, they'll vote to dissolve your pack anyway. At least this way you're fighting. You're showing them you believe in him enough to risk everything. Dominic looked down at her hand, still pressed against his chest, still feeling his heartbeat accelerate under her touch in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with the mate bond his wolf kept insisting was real. When did you become so wise, he asked. When I started caring about people who deserve better than the hand they've been dealt. She pulled back her hand, leaving a cold spot where warmth had been. Think about it. We still have 18 days. Enough time to prepare him, to practice, to make this work if we're smart and careful and very, very lucky. She returned to the tapestry. Dominic stood there watching her work. Watching her hands restore what time had damaged. Watching her make whole what had been broken. And he realized with sudden terrifying clarity that he was in love with her. Not the careful political love he'd had for Isabel, not the respectful partnership built on duty and bloodlines, but the deep, consuming, world-ending kind of love that made you vulnerable, that made you stupid, that made you willing to risk everything for one more day in her presence. He was 52 years old, an alpha, a king in all but official title, and he had fallen completely, irrevocably for the human woman who sat in his archives threading new life into old stories. It was the worst possible timing. It was also the only thing that felt real in a world of political maneuvering and dying traditions. 12 days before the summit, Sebastian made his move. Dominic had been expecting it, had seen the signs accumulating like storm clouds, the private phone calls, the encrypted emails, the long absences explained with vague excuses about pack business and border patrols. He had hoped he was wrong, hoped that 27 years of brotherhood meant something more than expedience and shared history. But hope, Dominic was learning, was often just another word for willful blindness to uncomfortable truths. The confrontation happened in the study, late night. Both of them with whiskey they weren't drinking. Both of them knowing this conversation would end something that had survived wars and losses and decades of shared blood. I sent the letter to the council, Sebastian said without preamble. No apology, no justification, just flat statement of fact. I told them about Asher's shadow episodes, about the times he's lost control, about the risks he poses not just to himself, but to everyone around him. Dominic set down his glass very carefully, felt his wolf surge forward, demanding blood for betrayal, pushed it back down with effort that left him shaking. Why? Because someone had to tell the truth. You're so blinded by love for that boy, so desperate to be the father you never had, that you can't see he's going to destroy everything you've built. He's my son. He's a liability. And in 12 days, when the council sees him, they're going to agree with me. They're going to vote for consolidation. And Ravencroft will cease to exist as anything more than a footnote in someone else's history. Then you've killed us. No. Sebastian stood up, his movements sharp with contained aggression. I'm trying to save us. I've negotiated with Frostpack. If we merge voluntarily before the summit, we keep our territory, our people, our identity. We just changed the name on the letterhead. Meredith has agreed to favorable terms. And Asher goes to a facility, a good one, comfortable, where he can live out his life in peace without the pressure of being an heir he'll never be capable of becoming. Dominic felt the rage build like lava, felt every instinct scream to shift, to attack, to tear out the throat of the man who had just betrayed not just him, but his son. But he held it back. Barely. Because Sebastian was right about one thing. Rage wasn't strategy. Get out, Dominic said quietly, the voice of an alpha issuing a final command. Dominic, I'm trying to get out of my house, out of my pack, out of my sight. You have until sunrise to clear your quarters. After that, you're trespassing on Ravencroft territory, and I will treat you like any other threat to my family." Sebastian's face hardened into something cold and distant. The face of a man who had lost everything once and learned to survive by not caring. "You're making a mistake." "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." Sebastian walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know you love that boy. But love doesn't fix broken things. It just makes you hurt more when they shatter. And Dominic? They always shatter. Always." He left. Dominic sat alone in the study, feeling the foundation crack, feeling 30 years of friendship collapse into betrayal, feeling the walls close in, unless he could pull off a miracle in 12 days. He pulled out his phone and called Nora. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep, but instantly alert. The voice of someone who had learned to wake up ready for crisis. "Dominic, what's wrong?" "Everything. Can you come to the study?" "I'll be right there." She arrived in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair mussed, eyes alert. The warrior underneath the civilian clothes. Dominic told her what Sebastian had done. About the letter. About the betrayal. About the 12 days they had left before everything came crashing down. Nora listened in silence. When he finished, she said, "Then we move up the timeline. We stop preparing and start executing." "Executing what?" "A counter-narrative. Sebastian told them Asher is dangerous. We show them he's healing. We document his progress, film it, create a record, send it to every council member before the summit, so they walk in having seen the truth. They'll say it's staged, edited, manipulated. Then we invite them here for a pre-summit inspection. Let them see him in his environment. Let them meet him as a child, not a liability or a political problem to solve." Dominic shook his head. "You don't understand wolf politics. If they come here and he has even one episode, even one moment of shadow manifestation, we've given them ammunition. We've proven Sebastian's point. Then we control the variables. We choose the time, the setting, the witnesses. We stack the deck as much as we can." Nora leaned forward. "Dominic, you're playing defense. You're trying not to lose. But you can't win by not losing. You have to take the offensive. Force them to respond to you instead of vice versa. And if it backfires, then we lose 12 days earlier than we would have anyway. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have fought." She reached across and took his hand. "You taught Asher to build cities just so he could knock them down. You taught him that destruction isn't failure. It's just part of the process. Maybe it's time you believed that yourself." Dominic looked at their joined hands, at the calluses, the scars, the evidence of lives lived in the trenches fighting battles that left marks. "I can't do this alone," he said quietly. "Good thing you're not alone." 8 days before the summit, Elder Cornelius arrived with 3 council members for the inspection. They came unannounced, as was their right under pack law. Arrived in black SUVs with tinted windows, emerged in their formal robes like judges arriving for sentencing. Dominic met them at the door. Nora stood beside him, and he felt steadier for her presence. Martha had Asher in the garden, playing with blocks. Normal, calm, exactly as they had rehearsed for this possibility. "Elder Cornelius," Dominic said, "this is unexpected. We received disturbing information from your former beta," Cornelius said without pleasantries. "The council felt an inspection was warranted before the summit to verify the child's status and assess the validity of Sebastian's claims. Of course, Asher is in the garden. Would you like to observe?" "We would." Dominic led them through the house. His heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that they were here to find fault, to confirm Sebastian's accusations, to build their case for removal. But Nora had been right. Defense wouldn't win this, only offense would. They emerged into the garden. Asher was sitting on a blanket, building a tower of blocks with the focused concentration of a 4-year-old architect. Martha sat nearby, reading a book, the picture of domestic tranquility. Asher looked up at the approaching group. His eyes widened slightly at the strangers, at the unfamiliar sense and the weight of attention suddenly focused on him. But he didn't scream, didn't shift, didn't disappear into shadows. He just looked at Dominic and said, "Papa, home." It was a full sentence, 2 words strung together with intention and meaning and connection. The council members exchanged glances that Dominic couldn't quite read. "May we approach?" Cornelius asked. "Of course." They walked closer. Asher watched them, but didn't retreat. Didn't show fear beyond normal wariness. He was curious, cautious, but functional. One of the council members, a woman named Elder Thorne, knelt down at a respectful distance. "Hello, Asher. What are you building?" Asher looked at his tower, then at her, considering whether to engage. Then softly, "Castle. It's a very nice castle. May I help?" Asher considered this for a long moment, weighing trust against fear. Then he handed her a block. For 20 minutes, the council members observed, asked gentle questions, watched Asher interact, watched him play, watched him be a child instead of a diagnosis or a political problem or the culmination of a dying bloodline's last hopes. Finally, Cornelius stood and gestured for Dominic to walk with him. They moved to the far side of the garden, out of Asher's earshot. "He's improved significantly," Cornelius said without preamble. "Yes. The woman, Nora Ashford, she's responsible?" "Partially. But mostly it's time, patience, treating him like a child who needs healing instead of a problem that needs solving." Cornelius nodded slowly, his ancient face giving nothing away. Sebastian's letter painted a very different picture. He claimed the boy was violent, uncontrollable, a danger to himself and others. Sebastian has his own trauma, his own losses. They've colored his judgment, made him see threats where there's only a frightened child trying to survive. Or they've given him clarity you lack. Cornelius turned to face him fully. "Dominic, I want to believe in you. Want to believe the Ravencroft line has a future. But believing isn't enough. In 8 days, you need to prove it. Not to me. To all 6 remaining alphas. To the entire council. One 4-year-old boy against 400 years of tradition and fear. I know the stakes. Do you? Because from where I stand, you're betting everything on a child who spoke his first words 2 weeks ago. That's not strategy. That's desperation dressed up in hope's clothing." "Sometimes," Dominic said, echoing words he'd spoken before, "they're the same thing." Cornelius studied him with those ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. That had watched the world change while wolves stayed stubbornly, fatally the same. "Your father would have made the practical choice," Cornelius said finally. "Would have sent the boy away, preserved the pack, accepted consolidation if necessary, duty before blood. My father also died alone, unmourned by his son, remembered as a competent administrator but not a good man." Dominic looked back at Asher, at his son building castles with strangers, trusting despite every reason not to. "I'd rather be a good father and a failed alpha than the reverse. Then I hope fatherhood is enough to save you, because it's all you'll have left if this fails." The council members departed an hour later. They said little, revealed nothing of how they would vote, left Dominic to twist in the wind of uncertainty. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced his room like a caged animal, replaying the inspection, analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to predict how they'd vote and coming up empty. A soft knock pulled him from his spiral. Nora stood in the doorway. "Saw your light. Thought you might need company." "I need certainty. Company is a poor substitute. It's all I've got." She walked in and sat on the edge of his bed without asking permission. They seemed impressed. Asher did well. He did, but will it be enough? I don't know. No one does. That's the nature of risks. She patted the bed beside her. "Sit down. You're making me anxious with all the pacing." Dominic sat. The bed shifted under his weight. They sat side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat between them, close enough for his wolf to rumble contentedly at her proximity. "I keep thinking about Isabel," Dominic said, "about how she died, about what Asher saw that night. Have you ever asked him directly?" "He can't tell me. Can't find the words for whatever horror he witnessed. Maybe he doesn't need words." Nora turned to face him. "Tomorrow, I want to try something. Art therapy. Specifically, shadow puppetry. Let him recreate what he saw using shapes and light. Sometimes trauma comes out easier through metaphor than direct statement. And if he shows us something we're not ready to see, then we see it anyway. Because not knowing is worse than knowing. Uncertainty is the mind killer." Dominic looked at her. Really looked. At the gray eyes that saw through every defense. At the scars she wore like medals earned in battles most people didn't survive. At the strength wrapped in compassion, wrapped in vulnerability, she was finally letting him see. "Why are you really here, Nora?" he asked quietly. "You could have walked away a dozen times, taken the money and run. But you're still here. Why?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, because for the first time in 6 years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, because Asher reminds me that broken doesn't mean worthless, and because you—" She trailed off. "Because I what?" "Because you make me remember what it feels like to want something for myself instead of just surviving day to day. To feel instead of just endure." The air between them charged, electric, dangerous, full of possibility and risk in equal measure. Dominic knew he should pull back, should maintain professional distance, should remember that she was his employee, and this was inappropriate, and in 8 days his entire world might collapse, and taking this step would only make the potential loss more devastating. But he was tired of should, tired of appropriate, tired of building walls when what he wanted was connection. He reached out and cupped her face, gave her every opportunity to pull away, to say no, to maintain the boundaries that had kept them safe from this exact complication. She leaned into his touch. "This is a terrible idea," Dominic said. "The worst," Nora agreed. "We have 8 days until everything falls apart. Then let's have 8 days. He kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as she responded, as her hands came up to his chest, as she pulled him closer with an urgency that matched his own. It wasn't the desperate passion of youth. It was the deliberate intimacy of people who had lived enough to know how rare this was, how fragile, how precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora smiled. "Well, that was complicated," Dominic finished. "I was going to say overdue." He laughed, actually laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears after so many weeks of tension. "Stay," he said, "tonight, just stay." She did. They lay together in the dark, fully clothed, her head on his chest, listening to each other breathe, feeling each other's heartbeat, making no promises about tomorrow because tomorrow was too uncertain for promises. But tonight they had this, and for now it was enough. The next day, day 47 of Nora's residency, they set up the shadow puppet theater in Asher's room. It was simple. A white sheet stretched between 2 poles, a bright light behind it, and an assortment of cardboard cutouts in shapes ranging from simple geometric forms to complex silhouettes. Asher sat on the floor, watching with interest as Nora demonstrated. She held up a wolf shape, let it cast a shadow on the sheet, moved it through the light, showing how shadow and substance played together. "Your turn," she said. "Tell me a story." Asher took the wolf cutout, moved it across the sheet, added a smaller wolf, a pup. Dominic and Nora watched in silence as Asher built his story. The pup and the wolf walked together, happy, safe. Then a third shape appeared, dark, shapeless, just a mass of shadow with no defined edges, pure darkness given form. The shapeless thing attacked the wolf. The pup tried to help. Couldn't. Too small, too weak. The wolf fell. The shapeless thing turned toward the pup. Asher's hands started to shake. The cutouts trembled. Dominic could smell fear spiking in the air. "It's okay," Nora said softly. "You're safe. We're here. What happened next?" Asher put down the cutouts, stood up, walked behind the sheet himself. And then he did something neither of them expected. He shifted. Partially. Just his hands. Claws extending. Shadow pooling around him like living darkness responding to his call. He used his shadow-touched form to create a new shape on the sheet. A massive protective silhouette. A guardian emerging from darkness itself. The guardian fought the shapeless thing, drove it away, stood over the pup, protected. Then Asher shifted back, walked out from behind the sheet, looked at Dominic with eyes that were finally clear. "Papa came," Asher said, simple words carrying enormous weight. "Papa saved me." Dominic's chest constricted, his vision blurred with tears he didn't try to hide. He hadn't saved Isabel, had arrived too late, had found only blood and silence and his traumatized son. But in Asher's memory, distorted by trauma and time and the mind's need to create meaning from horror, Dominic had been there, had fought the darkness, had protected. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that's what children needed. Not perfection, not invulnerability, just the belief that someone would come when they called, that they weren't alone in the dark. Dominic crossed the room and knelt in front of his son. "I will always come for you. Always, no matter what. That's a promise." Asher hugged him, small arms wrapping around Dominic's neck, trusting, believing. Dominic held his son and let himself cry. Finally. For Isabel. For the years lost. For the future uncertain but somehow impossibly still within reach. Still. Nora quietly left them alone, gave them space for their grief and their healing and their hope. When Dominic finally emerged an hour later, he found her in the archives. "We're going to the summit," he said. "I know. And whatever happens, I need you to know. You saved us. Not just Asher. Me too." She stood and crossed to him, kissed him gently. "We saved each other. That's how it works." 6 days before the summit, the formal invitation arrived. All 6 remaining alphas, all 12 elders, plus select members of each pack's leadership. The venue was neutral ground, an old lodge in the mountains where the original treaty had been signed a century ago. The agenda was simple: vote on the Consolidation Act, vote on the absorption of Ironwood territory, vote on the future of Ravencroft Pack. Dominic had 6 days to prepare his defense, 6 days to turn certain defeat into possible survival. He spent them well. He assembled documents, precedents, legal arguments showing shadow-touched Ravencrofts throughout history who had led with distinction. He called in favors from alphas he'd helped over the decades. He leveraged every alliance, every debt, every friendship that hadn't been poisoned by Sebastian's letter. And he prepared Asher, not to perform, not to pretend, just to be present, to show the council who he really was beneath the fear and trauma. They practiced walking into rooms full of strangers, practiced staying calm under scrutiny, practiced using words instead of shadows when afraid. Asher wasn't perfect. He still had moments, still slipped, still needed Nora's hand to ground him. But he was trying, improving, growing stronger. And that was all Dominic could ask. The night before they left for the summit, Dominic gathered his pack, all 173 wolves who called Ravencroft home, who had pledged loyalty to his line, who trusted him to keep them safe even when safety seemed impossible. He stood before them in the Great Hall and told them the truth. "Tomorrow the council will vote on our future. The odds are not in our favor. Sebastian's betrayal has damaged our position. Ironwood's death has shifted the balance, and my son carries a gene that terrifies them more than they'll admit." He paused. Let the fear ripple through the crowd. Let them feel what was at stake. But we are Ravencroft. We are the pack that has endured for 400 years, that has survived wars and plagues and the slow grinding entropy of time. We have endured not because we were the strongest, not because we were the most ruthless, but because we were the most stubborn, because we refused to quit even when quitting was the logical choice. Scattered laughter. Good, they needed to laugh. "So tomorrow, I will go before the council. I will present our case, and I will show them that the future of our kind doesn't lie in consolidation or surrender. It lies in adaptation, in accepting that bloodlines evolve, that strength comes in forms we don't expect, and that sometimes the thing we fear most is exactly what we need to survive." He looked out at their faces, young and old, strong and scarred, his people, his responsibility, his family. "No matter what happens tomorrow, know this. You are my pack, my family, my honor, and I will fight for you until there's nothing left to fight with." They stood as one, and they howled. The sound shook the rafters, shook the windows, shook the very foundations of the manor. It was defiance. It was loyalty. It was the sound of a pack that refused to go quietly into extinction. Dominic howled with them. Let the wolf rise. Let the alpha claim its place. Tomorrow they would go to war. Tonight, they would remember what they were fighting for. After the gathering dispersed, Dominic found Nora waiting in his study. "That was quite a speech," she said. "It was the truth. I'm coming with you, to the summit. Nora, you're not pack. They won't allow it. Then they can try to stop me." She stood up. "You've spent weeks teaching Asher to be brave, to face his fears. I'm not letting you walk into that room without backup. It could be dangerous. Political maneuvering is one thing, but wolves under pressure can get violent, can forget themselves. I've been shot at by actual enemies, Dominic. I think I can handle some grumpy council members." He smiled despite everything. "When did you get so fierce?" "I've always been fierce. You just started noticing." He crossed to her, pulled her close, kissed her like it might be the last time. "Because it might be. If this goes wrong tomorrow," he said against her lips, "if they vote against us, I want you to take Asher and run. Get him somewhere safe, somewhere far from pack politics. Not a chance. We stand together or not at all." "Nora." "No." She pulled back and looked him in the eye. "You don't get to be noble and sacrificial. We're past that. We're in this together, all 3 of us, whatever happens." Dominic looked at this woman who had crashed into his life like a meteor, who had shattered every defense, who had taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness and love wasn't a liability. "I love you," he said, simple, honest, terrifying. "I know," she said, "I love you too. Now let's go save your son." The summit began at dawn. The lodge was ancient, stone and timber, built before electricity, before modern convenience. A place where wolves could be wolves without pretense or apology. 6 alphas sat in a semicircle. Behind them, their advisors and pack representatives. Above them, the elder council in ceremonial robes that smelled of tradition and uncompromising law. And in the center, a chair for the accused. Dominic walked in with Asher on one side and Nora on the other. The room went silent. Eyes tracked them, judged them, measured them. "Dominic Ravencroft," Elder Cornelius intoned. "You stand before this council to answer questions regarding the fitness of your heir and the future of your pack. How do you plead?" "I plead that the question itself is flawed," Dominic said clearly. "You're not asking if my heir is fit. You're asking if he conforms, if he matches your expectations built on fear and tradition. And when he doesn't, you want to erase him rather than expand your definition of what an heir can be." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Alpha Meredith Frost stood. Dominic's breath caught, but her expression was unreadable. "You speak of definitions, yet your son carries the shadow gene, a gene we have legislated against for 200 years because of the madness it brings, the loss of control, the danger." "No," Dominic said. "We've legislated against it because of fear, because it's different, because it challenges our assumptions. But I have documented evidence of shadow-touched Ravencrofts throughout our history who led with distinction, who were not mad, who were exceptional." He gestured. Nora stepped forward with a folder, distributed copies to the council with steady hands, despite the weight of dozens of predatory gazes. They read in silence. Dominic watched their faces, saw skepticism war with curiosity. Finally, Elder Thorne spoke. "These records are compelling, but they don't prove current viability. They show historical outliers, not modern proof." "Then let me show you current viability," Dominic said. He turned to Asher, knelt down so they were eye level, so his son would see a father, not an alpha issuing commands. "Asher, can you show them what you showed me, the shadow puppets, the story?" Asher looked at the assembled crowd, at the stern faces, at the judgment radiating from every corner. He looked at Nora. She nodded encouragement. He looked at Dominic, his father, his protector, his believer. And then Asher did something remarkable. He stepped forward, into the center of the room, small, vulnerable, alone but choosing to be. He closed his eyes, and he shifted. Not violently, not out of control. He shifted with intention, with purpose. Shadow pooled around him, his form blurred. And then he was moving through the shadows, disappearing, reappearing, dancing between light and dark with grace that took Dominic's breath away. It was beautiful, controlled, a demonstration of mastery over what they all feared. The chamber was silent, transfixed. Then Asher shifted back, stood in the center, and spoke clearly. "I am not broken," he said to the assembled wolves. "I am different, and different is not less." The words hung in the air. A 4-year-old child delivering truth that centuries of tradition had tried to suppress. Dominic stood. "My son has shadow blood. He has trauma. He has challenges that would have broken most adults. But he stands before you now, speaking, functional, brave, not despite his differences, because of them." The shadow gene allowed him to survive witnessing his mother's murder, allowed him to retreat into safety when reality was too much, allowed him to protect himself when we failed to protect him. Dominic looked at each alpha in turn. "You want to consolidate packs because you think the old ways are dying. You're right, they are. But not because we're weak, because we're rigid. We've bred ourselves into a genetic corner, eliminated diversity in favor of purity, and now we're paying the price. The future of our kind isn't in consolidation. It's in expansion, in accepting variations, in letting the bloodlines evolve. My son represents that future, shadow-touched, traumatized, human-raised. He is everything we've been taught to fear, and he is exactly what we need." The silence stretched like wire pulled tight. Then Alpha Frost stood. "I have opposed you every step of this process," she said. Her voice carried through the chamber. "Have questioned your judgment, your priorities, your fitness to lead." Dominic braced for the killing blow. "But I was wrong," Frost continued. "Not about the challenges, those are real, but about the solution. Consolidation is surrender dressed up as strategy. This child, he is rebellion, adaptation, survival." She looked at the council. "I vote against the Consolidation Act, and I vote to recognize Asher Ravencroft as legitimate heir to the Ravencroft line." Shock rippled through the room. Then another alpha stood, then another. One by one they voted. When the final count came, it was 4-2. 4 votes to preserve the packs, to reject consolidation, to accept Asher. Dominic felt his knees threaten to buckle, felt Nora's hand on his arm, steadying him, anchoring him. They had won. Not by much, not easily, but they had won. Elder Cornelius stood. The council recognizes the vote. Ravencroft pack will retain autonomy. Asher Ravencroft is acknowledged as heir. He looked at Dominic, and for the first time he smiled. Well played, Alpha. Well played indeed. The summit continued for hours. Territory negotiations, ironwood absorption debates, technical details, but Dominic barely heard it. He sat with Asher in his lap and Nora beside him, and felt the weight of 30 years finally lift. They had survived. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but alive. That night, after the ceremonies ended, after the political theater concluded, Dominic stood on the lodge balcony looking at the stars. Nora found him there. "It's over," she said. "This part is. There's still work to do, still challenges ahead, still a lifetime of proving we made the right choice. There always will be, but tonight you can rest." She leaned against the railing beside him. "What happens now?" "Now I rebuild, reinforce, prove that today wasn't a fluke but the beginning of something new." "And us?" Dominic turned to face her fully. "I want you to stay, not as an employee, as family, as my mate, if you'll have me. I'm human. I noticed. Your pack might not accept. My pack will accept what I tell them to accept. And I tell them that you are the woman who saved my son, who taught me to be a father, who made me remember what it means to be human under the alpha mantle." Nora smiled. "That's quite a title. You've earned it." He pulled her close. "Stay with me. Help me build a future where children like Asher don't have to hide what they are, where different isn't dangerous, where we adapt instead of die." "That's a big ask." "I know, but I'm betting everything on it. On you, on us." She kissed him, soft, certain, full of promise. "Then I guess we're both all in." Inside the lodge, Asher was sleeping, surrounded by wolves who had spent the day debating his worth, but who now stood guard over his rest, protecting, accepting. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't certain, but it was hope, and sometimes hope was enough. Dominic held Nora and watched the stars, and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like the future was something to build toward instead of simply survive. The last king had made his gambit, and against all odds, against all probability, he had won. Not through strength alone, through love, through vulnerability, through the courage to change, through being a father first and an alpha second. And in that reversal of priority, he had saved them all.